Subscribe to my YouTube channel for more wonderful and beautiful stories. Title: The Living Scarecrow and the Magical Farm. Once upon a time, in a small, quiet village, there was a farm that was known far and wide for its vibrant crops and healthy animals. The farm belonged to a kind old couple, Mr. and Mrs. Willow. Every year, their fields were full of golden wheat, juicy tomatoes, and the most delicious apples anyone had ever tasted. At the center of their farm stood a scarecrow named Rusty. Rusty was not just any scarecrow. He was special. He wore a tattered straw hat, a patched-up coat, and had buttons for eyes. His straw-stuffed body was a bit lopsided, but he had a warm, friendly smile stitched onto his face. Every morning, Mr. Willow would tip his hat to Rusty as he went to tend the fields, and Mrs. Willow would often talk to him while she picked vegetables. One chilly autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to twinkle, something extraordinary happened. A soft, golden light floated down from the sky, landing gently on Rusty's head. The light was warm and comforting, like a blanket on a cold night. As the light grew brighter, Rusty began to feel something he'd never felt before. A tingle in his straw arms and legs, a flutter in his chest where his heart would be if he had won. Suddenly, Rusty blinked. His button eyes, which had always stared blankly ahead, now sparkled with life. He lifted one straw-filled hand and then the other. He wiggled his feet, which were stuffed into old boots, and realized with a start that he could move. Rusty looked around in amazement. The world seemed different from the way he had seen it before. The colors of the leaves were brighter, the night air cooler, and the stars above twinkled like diamonds. Rusty took a tentative step forward, nearly falling over as his legs wobbled beneath him. But with each step, he grew more confident. As Rusty explored the farm, he noticed how quiet and still everything was. The chickens were roosting, the cows were asleep in the barn, and the only sound was the gentle rustling of the wind through the trees. Rusty decided to take a walk around the fields, something he had always longed to do. He wandered through the rows of corn, touching the tall stalks as he passed. He marveled at the pumpkins, round and orange, waiting to be picked. As he strolled, he came across a patch of flowers that Mrs. Willow had planted. Rusty bent down to smell them, delighting in their sweet fragrance. As the night grew darker, Rusty realized that the farm animals might not be as safe as they seemed. Without the old couple to watch over them, what if something happened? Rusty decided that it was his duty to protect the farm, just as he had always been meant to do. But now, he could do more than just stand in one place. Rusty climbed up to a hill that overlooked the entire farm. From there, he could see the fields, the barn, and the farmhouse. He stood tall and vigilant, his button eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. Hours passed, and just when Rusty thought the night would pass without incident, he saw something moving in the shadows near the chicken coop. Rusty quietly crept down the hill, trying to be as quiet as possible. When he got closer, he saw that it was a sly fox sneaking towards the chickens. The fox's eyes gleamed as it prepared to pounce. "Hey you!" Rusty called out, his voice echoing through the night. The fox stopped in its tracks, startled by the scarecrow who was supposed to be lifeless. It turned to face Rusty, its fur bristling. "You're not supposed to be able to talk," the fox hissed. "And you're not supposed to be here," Rusty replied, standing his ground. "These chickens are under my protection." The fox, realizing that this was no ordinary scarecrow, backed away slowly. It was not willing to take on a moving, talking scarecrow. With one last look at the coop, the fox turned tail and disappeared into the night. Rusty felt a surge of pride. He had protected the farm, just like he always wanted to. As he returned to his post in the field, the golden light that had brought him to life began to fade. Rusty felt his limbs growing heavy, his movements slowing down. He managed to return to his spot before he could no longer move. The last thing he saw before everything went dark again was the first light of dawn peeking over the horizon. When Mr. and Mrs. Willow came out to the farm that morning, they found everything just as it should be. The chickens were safe, the fields were undisturbed, and Rusty was standing tall in his usual place. But something was different. Mr. Willow noticed that Rusty seemed to have a new glow about him, as if he had done something wonderful. Mrs. Willow smiled at the Scarecrow, her eyes twinkling with a knowing look. "Thank you, Rusty," she whispered, as if she knew exactly what had happened. And so, every night when the stars came out, Rusty the Living Scarecrow stood watch over the farm. Though he could only move when the magical light appeared, he always made sure that the farm was safe and sound. The animals, the crops, and even the little mice that lived in the barn all knew that they were protected by the bravest, kindest scarecrow in the world. And from that day on, the farm was known not just for its delicious produce, but for the magical scarecrow who watched over it with love and care. The end.